All right. How are we looking here? It's Wednesday, but it feels like the end of the week to me. I don't know how about others. It's been a long week. I just want to remind folks to utilize the chat tonight. Anything that comes up, please keep yourself muted and your cameras off. It just helps with bandwidth. We'll get started in a few minutes. In addition, I know we wanted to get you some additional materials. So Krista, you want them to put their emails in the chat for?
Yeah, so if you can put your name, your full name, how you want it written on your mindfulness certificate, along with your email addresses, and I can send you the copies of the videos from the past sessions, as well as the questionnaire that we did last time.
Wonderful, 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 wonderful. All right. What do you think, Chris? Do you want to wait a few more minutes or just jump in?
We can make like 2 more minutes.
2 more minutes. All right.
2 more minutes.
Copy that.
And I'll write down the names in the chat.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. Happy Wednesday to you. I hope everyone is well and healthy and ready to learn tonight. So again, have some paper, something to write with. We're going to give you some journaling prompts. We have some good content tonight. We have a great video to show. And yeah, we are on week three, Krista. Looking good. So last week, we talked a little bit about emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence as it pertains to your personality specifically, and your ability to be empathetic, relatable, understanding others. And why that's important? That's important because when we're trying to be mindful and understand the concepts of mindfulness, one of the main pillars is to have compassion and empathy towards others. It provides you with a macro view of your world and your point of view, rather than a micro point of view. So it kind of opens you up a little bit, which is wonderful. So last week we did, as Krista talked about, we did a little quiz. So she had some homework with the emotional intelligence assessment, and that will be sent to you, which is great. So, you know, you can take your time and go through it and really dig into that content and spend some good space and time with it. And we also talked a lot about, you know, of course, we keep talking again and again about resiliency, what it means to be resilient, what is part of your personality. We talked about the many different personality types that are on the spectrum, right? Across the continuum, rather. Type A's, type B's, type D's. And of course, one that we all strive to be is hardy. A hardy personality, it couples with a resilient personality. So that was last week. We had some really nice discussion. again, I want to highly encourage people to utilize the chat. Krista's monitoring that information as we kind of go along. And again, we will have some time at the end just for some questions and input and some brief discussion. I want to be mindful of everybody's time. I know last week we went over a little bit. So I'm ready to dig in tonight, talking about stress and emotion. Stress and emotion. And I think if you remember, and Krista and I talked about this last week, when we are stressed, when the stress response is activated biologically, physiologically, interpersonally in our bodies, emotions happen instantaneously. Because that's the way our brain's communicating with the rest of our bodies, to our vital organs and everything else, to respond to stress. So if you recall, on the first week, I talked about, being eaten by a bear or running from the bear. So now we're in a world where stress happens all the time. All the time, it comes at us all the time. We talked about technology and kind of what that's like for all of us and the impacts that stress has on our life. Again, micro or macro. So very small or very large. And then what happens over time is what's called chronic stress. Like I'm sure you've heard of chronic diseases like heart disease or some types of autoimmune diseases or other things, chronic health issues. Chronic is over time. So stress is the same thing. We can have chronic stress, strain over time. So some of the stress emotions that I want to talk about tonight, Krista and I, and I'm again, really happy to be back with you to have this discussion. We're excited for it and to show you a really great TED Talk video. Stress has two emotions, anger and fear. And of those stress emotions, there's subsets. So when you look at anger, we're going to talk about anger first, kind of in this slide. So when you think about anger, these are some of the sub feelings or sub emotions that come up: rage, jealousy, hostility, prejudice, impatience. Guilt is based out of fear, which is huge because when you think about it therapeutically, people carry these emotions for years and years and years, right? So it can become toxic to your body as a result. Envy, indignation is when someone is just out of order, right? Fear, and then frustration. So these are all subsets of anger. Now I would say this, and Krista and I both work with children. I'm sorry, I work with college students. That's not accurate. But I think they may be children to some degree. When you work with people and you're a teacher, you have to deal with emotions. Because I don't know about you, but when I do algebra with my children, I sometimes get really frustrated because I don't understand a lot of the mathematical concepts that I wish I understood a little better. So I'm always on YouTube looking up how to do algebraic equations and things like that. I have to watch it and study it. And then, here's my 14-year-old. It's like zipping through it like it's nothing, which is wonderful. I love that. But frustration, happens. So I think we have to recognize these different subsets of how a stressful situation engages anger and why. And the other piece of the takeaway that's important to know, and I'll get into knowing your anger style, is we're responsible for our emotions as human beings. So I've done a lot of work in the community and locally. I used to work at the emergency room at St. Francis Hospital. I was a domestic violence counselor, working with both victims of partner violence and perpetrators of partner violence. And the bottom line is we're in control of our emotions, and we need to be. You are responsible for your affect and how you manage your stress. So, and there's consequences for every stress emotion, right? So when you're angry, and we've all been there, and I think it's normal to have anger reactions. You don't just want to sit there and be a robot all glazed over. But how you respond is your responsibility. Some people act out in anger and violence. Some people act out in anger and shame. Some people act out anger and blame. We can go on and on and on. So it's really important to understand owning the emotion. I feel angry. I feel angry because, and then kind of figuring it out. It's like when you have I always use this metaphor. If you wear jewelry and you have a really fine necklace and it gets all tangled up, like I can't stand when jewelry gets tangled. I just have no patience. It's kind of the same thing with our emotions. You have to slowly try to unwind the tangle to kind of get to the why. And a lot of times, this is a practice, right? Kind of like any other thing that you would do, learning to ride a bike, a craft, algebra. The more you practice, the better you get. The same thing is managing your anger and your stress response. And it becomes more intrinsic over time, that it's just instant. Intrinsic means you immediately know how you're going to respond. So some of the things that are important to think about when we talk about anger is knowing your anger style. That sounds weird, doesn't it? Like an anger style, like a fashion statement, but there are different anger styles. So some people are explosive. Some people are internalizers. Some people are, they project onto others their anger, whether physically or mentally, verbally, etc. So understanding what your anger style is important for mindfulness, because stress is upsetting. And depending on the stress in your life, you could have an anger response, particularly in relation to grief and loss, okay? So it's just important to consider that. Monitoring your anger. Now, what do I mean by monitoring your anger? I think it's, again, having a level of awareness when the emotion comes up. So, and Krista would tell you, as she works in early childhood development, working with children to voice emotional response is a critical life skill. So there's times as adults that some adults don't know how to articulate or voice an emotional concern because they were taught boys don't cry, girls don't yell, like gender normative behavior, if you follow me. So it's important that as we move through life, particularly now and where we are in our place in the world, we teach and model appropriate emotional responses, and it's important to express your emotions. It's okay to be angry, 100% okay to be angry. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be disappointed, frustrated, but owning it, monitoring it, knowing what it means to you and how to verbalize that to others in a healthy way is really, really critical. De-escalating your anger kind of goes with monitoring. So understanding, I guess, your triggers, right, Krista, would you say? So a lot of times we operate in life where we know things that are going to set us off, like, oh my gosh, here comes this family member again, or here comes this, or here's this person at work that frustrates me, right? Triggers. So how do you de-escalate your emotions for you so you're able to stay in control? Learning to outthink your anger is just kind of reframing. So what do I mean by reframing? It's taking a situation where you normally would feel out of control and kind of owning it to a reframe to the things that you can control. For example, if you're in your place of employment and you're having a disagreement with a coworker and the coworker is getting loud and it's escalating, you have a choice to engage or you can decline and walk away, right? So a lot of times when you're in the heat of a situation, things kind of ball up and get out of control. And that's also a process that just needs to play itself out, right? And when we look about violent behavior, sometimes it plays itself out in very deleterious ways that are, ending in really real harm. So it's important, and that goes to the next point, is to get comfortable with your feelings. Because feeling angry and disappointed and sad and having emotions that are you would equate as negative is very uncomfortable. And some people don't feel comfortable in those spaces because it's not a fun feeling to feel grief and loss and anger and frustration. But it's a process. And I think many of you have heard the phrase, the best way to get through a situation is through it, not around it, over it, under it, right? You have to go through it. And by going through it, that's being comfortable, trying to establish relationships with these emotions that come up for you that may be negative for you. Planning ahead. This is all about boundaries, in my opinion, the plan ahead. If you know that there's a situation that could be upsetting to you, frustrating, triggering in any way, you need to plan for that situation and either remove yourself from it, or how can you help yourself in the situation so you don't escalate to a point of no return, right? With your emotional response. I love number 7 because I'm really big on community and your tribe and building your family around you, whether it's your blood family or friends that you consider family. Having a strong support system is critical to any type of experience that you go through. And as human beings, we're symbiotic. We need to have connection. It's critical to our life development. And when that connection is lacking, there's a lot of developmental damage that can happen. Realistic expectations is also about boundaries and understanding what that means for you. For you, not someone else's agenda or someone else's what they think you should be doing or what they think is in your best interest, but realistic for you. Problem-solving techniques. I always tell my children, like, how are you going to solve this problem? Developing problem-solving skills is a real critical competency for dealing with your stress, and also as a mindfulness toolkit, an approach to being mindful. There's problems that happen all the time, all the time, all day long. So, it could be something small as your cell phone died and you don't have a charger, or something large as there's some sort of critical incident occurring that you have to manage. So how you problem solve speaks to your hardiness and your resiliency as a person. Number 10, stay in shape. I think what that speaks to is that the more you move your body and the more you keep your mind sharp, the more it supports all of the other tasks here that are listed, to be honest with you. So I think that speaks to that. And then turn complaints into requests. I love this one. This is also a reframe. So if you, like, for example, if you are someone that is consistently not on time, if you're an event-based person and not a clock-based person, and someone says to you, you're always late. Why are you always late? And then as I would say, oh, I'm really sorry. The reframe here is, thank you for waiting for me. Now we can move on, right? Because you're kind of de-escalating the shame factor and making sure you're honoring someone else's time by saying, thank you for waiting for me, if that makes sense. Yes, knowing your anger style is very interesting. There's a comment in the chat. The other emotion that comes up with the stress response is fear. Fear is kind of the parallel best friend of change, which we talked about in the first week. People don't like change because they're afraid of it. Something's different. It's not the norm. It's not within the context of what is day-to-day or normative. So people are afraid of things that they don't understand. And that's a whole other lecture. But when you think about fear, these 5 things come to fruition with the fear emotion. And fear paralyzes people. Fear is rooted in anxiety. So most people that suffer from diagnosable anxiety disorders, there's an underlying fear of something. So fear of well, what if this happens? So the constant cycling in the brain of, you know, you're going to play out this situation. If this could happen and this can happen, and what if this happens? Clinically, about 90 to 99% of the things that we worry about, which is the next subset of fear, never happens. And again, I keep saying this to you as a group because it's just ethically sound. If you are not in a violent home, not experiencing any adverse substance use, not in your environment is safe, and you're not experiencing oppression or racism on a daily basis, these things apply, if that makes sense. Worry is a big one. I think we all worry, right? We're all worried about something.
And I think, uncertainty it's a part of life. So, some people are gonna thrive on uncertainty and then others are not. And that's
Mm,
where all these emotions kind of come into play. But I think the big idea of fear is, when the threat is short termed, then these symptoms they will go away. But if the feelings are constant, that's where you're gonna get the health problems,
mm,
and you're gonna need to seek medical help at that point.
mhm, mhm. That's huge, Krista. I totally agree. And recognizing in yourself or with others that what Krista mentioned is occurring as a reoccurring cycling problem or issue that's interfering with your ability to be present in your day-to-day life, work, relationships, etc. And the other thing here is, life is a series of disappointments. I don't mean to sound negative. I'm sometimes a half empty type of person. I am naturally pessimistic just as a character trait. I don't know why I'm like that. I think I just always plan for the worst case scenario because then if it doesn't happen, I'm good.
Yeah.
But, life, we have to understand that life isn't a straight line. That's not how it works. And with fear, it's normal to understand also what your fear response is to life and stress. The other thing is doubt. This kind of falls hand in hand with risk taking because I also believe life is a series of taking risks in your profession, in relationships. What does Shakespeare say? Love is the biggest risk of all, right? Um, having doubt it's just as paralyzing as fear. And then more clinically, paranoia and also embarrassment. Embarrassment is interesting. Embarrassment because, and this is a subset of fear, embarrassed to feel like if you use your voice, speak out, you're going to be perceived as not knowledgeable. Or, I talk to students about this all the time. I don't want to say anything because I don't want to look stupid. Right. And I always feel everyone, and I said this on the first day, everyone has a story to tell, and everyone has a story that would break your heart. Right. So I think, so Miss Joy put in wanting to be in control. Oh my gosh, sorry, motorcycles. Wanting to be in control. That's also a big part of the fear. We want to be in control. Hypervigilance can be something that is also paralyzing.
So
And that leads to this.
so going into the basic human fears. So the first, fear of failure. So most people are afraid of failing at least some of the time. That's normal. So the problem is when we are allowing that fear to stop us from doing things that can put us in a better position or put us ahead. And this can be caused by traumatic experiences, family issues, school issues, relationship issues.
Mm-hmm.
And when this happens, it leads to unresolved trauma, which manifests when you're in adulthood. So some of the symptoms of fear of failure can be a reluctance to try new things. So that fear of change, procrastinating or anxiety, low self-esteem. So I'll give you an example, like public speaking. I'm not very good at it, which is interesting because I'm a teacher. So I'm constantly having to talk to kids, which is why I think I do really well with small children. Um, but growing up, you're taught children are heard, not seen. So
Mm,
I was never, given the opportunity to talk with adults and to converse with adults. So now I
mm,
recognize my fear. So I have children. So I encourage, my children to have adult conversations, to speak with adults, to find their voice, but to teach him to be respectful in that. So teaching them to have those conversations,
mhm,
where I see my weakness.
mhm.
So
Having a sense of agency is huge. I love that, Krista, what you just said, because I think it's true. I was something my mother always said too. Children should be seen and not heard. I never understood. I would sit there and be like, what does that mean? So, I agree. I think teaching agency is a big part of how we navigate the world.
right. The second one is the fear of rejection. Once again, this can be caused by early traumatic experiences. Loss or abandonment of a parent is huge. Poor peer relationships, and feeling unattractive. So there's a huge link between confidence and attractiveness.
Mhm,
So if there's no confidence, then there's a high probability that there's going to be rejection. Um, so again, symptoms of this would be like feeling like you can't be your true self, avoiding eye contact, losing your ability to effectively communicate. And the implications for this, as Kenna was saying before, what is like achievement and ambition. So your level of education might, or your career choices. You don't want to go to a job interview because you don't think that you're good enough to get that job. So now you're stuck. And this
mhm,
can lead to low self-esteem, depression, or that person then becomes critical of others. So it's like this
mhm.
ongoing
Cycle.
cycle. Yes.
Mm, mm. Yes. There is a comment in the chat, Krista. Fear of failure is real for our Jamaican culture, especially for my generations. We weren't allowed to fail.
Right.
So I think, and thank you for bringing that up, Miss Joy, because I feel that is a big part of all of this is understanding the cultural competencies in terms of your lens. So that's a big part of how all of this information is received. Because we could look at it and say, have agency, speak up for yourself. This is what you should do. And then it just is a no-go in some situations. And I talk to students about this a lot of time, particularly students, in just my experience and my lived experience working with students that are first generation college students. They come to university, it's a completely different environment. They're exposed to a diverse community, unlike anything they've ever seen before within their family structure that's been very closed. And then when they go home for break or when they're not in session, their health can be affected
Mhm.
because it's kind of like a weird situation. And then the person can experience what's called dissonance. And dissonance is having doubt and feeling like you're on one foot here and one foot there. And sometimes you feel like you're betraying someone or you're letting someone down when you're actually growing as a human being. So to Krista's point earlier about, children and giving them agency, that's a growth aspect too. So when people can emerge into a growth mindset, it's very telling. And it also, for some individuals that experience it doesn't happen that way. Krista was giving the example of majors and professions. I can't tell you how many students I talk to that say, I don't want to do this, but my parents want me to do this.
Right.
is sad to me, because what happens to, what do you want to do? So it's a whole other conversation. And then what's expected of you. So to the comments point, is we weren't allowed to fail. I want to come back to that a little later, but you weren't allowed to fail because of what was expected of you. You were representing your family, right? Like, there's a whole lot to unpack there with that comment. And I think it's huge. And thank you for putting that in the chat, Joy. And what that means, like, you weren't, and failure is definitely part of life.
Mhm.
It's definitely part of it. Fear of failure and worry of outcome. Two biggest obstacles in sports and normal life. Sure. 100%. And, I could tell so many stories. Like, for example, I don't know, this is just coming to mind. Like, I'm thinking of Oprah and like how many times she was told she wouldn't amount to anything as a journalist. Or Walt Disney, for example, who was told he shouldn't work with children.
Right. Or
All these stories.
Right. Who got cut from the basketball team and is the greatest basketball
Yes.
player. So
yeah. It's incredible, but having tenacious spirit is what pushes people over. So it's kind of like you get to a crossroads and you have to make a choice, right? And it's solely interdirected and has a lot to do with the other factors around you: family, influence, environment, etc. So that's some good stuff.
And then going into the fear, number 3, the fear of the unknown. So it's just your perception of danger. So it could be real or it could be fake. And that goes back to anxiety, lack of predictability. And there is a link between the fear of the unknown and alcohol use, uses.
Yes.
So, those not so healthy coping skills can present themselves if, these areas are not addressed. Number 4, fear of death. So it's normal to have some anxiety. This isn't a topic that I like to talk about, but it's natural, and the fear shouldn't affect your daily life. Many times religion and your beliefs take a role in this. Talk therapy is a good coping skill. Talking to others who share can be helpful, and then seeking out an expert if this is something that is just consuming your daily life. And then the one I think that is very pertaining to today is fear of isolation, right? So with the whole COVID-19 situation, there is a greater risk for suicide in some populations. But I saw a really interesting quote, and it said, the coronavirus did not cause social isolation. So I just want you guys to think for a minute about whether or not you agree or disagree with this statement. We're living in the digital age. Children and families, children are playing, my son does online gaming. He's talking to his cousin on the Xbox and the iPad. People are connecting without leaving their homes, and this was happening before the coronavirus. But I think what it is with COVID, it didn't give you a choice. Right. So now this is what it is. There's no option for you. I think that's what, kind of caused the
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I think pre-COVID, young people or just people in general is connecting. And we keep going back to that. Being able to read people's emotions is huge when you're having a conversation. And sometimes that doesn't really come through on FaceTime or Xbox or whatever. I see this all the time. And students that are roommates that have arguments and they leave each other Post-it notes, or they'd rather send a text than have a face-to-face conversation. It's scary. Be scary.
Right. And how is that, those social, emotional, how is that being addressed, you know, with students, with children, with adults? Um, the
100%.
the US, the Mental Health Association had statistic was in 2020, 9.7% of youth in the US have severe major depression. 60% of the youth with depression do not receive mental health treatment. So eventually those children are going to grow into adults, and what implications does that have for our society moving forward?
That's so telling to me because that's a big variant number. And that to me means what's the barriers there? Is it barrier access to care? Is it the family unit that doesn't believe in counseling or therapy?
Right.
Go see the minister, etc., like things like that. So that stuff is very interesting to me because that's a big number that doesn't seek out care. It's a high risk. Did they give you an age, Krista? I'm curious. Like
They
use
didn't give a specific age, but I assumed it was like school aged.
school age, so K through
Yeah.
12. Sure.
Um, but I work with K through 12, and I can tell you that it's the social emotional that is the huge part I think that is missing in the classroom. There's this huge push on the academics piece and no push for the social emotion. You know, everyone cares, but how exactly are you teaching these children to regulate their emotions and manage their emotions?
That's it right there. The regulation. Exactly. Or how to respond to an adult who, you know, you're not always praised. It's like the trophy generation, right? Like not everything's going to be a comment that's positive. How do you take critical feedback? And that's how you learn and grow, That's also part of it. Interesting. Really
Right.
good stuff. Hmm.
And then the last one is just the fear of loss of dominance, of self-dominance, which is that loss of control that you had touched on earlier. Um, so this can kind of present as obsessive compulsive disorder. So people who are constantly checking to make sure everything's in order, or just people who are living in constant uncertainty. They want to be in control of their environment. Um, so I think the common factor above all these is that, you know, your adverse childhood experiences, your traumas, um, they are they play a large role in this. And, you know, there are some solutions. Such as self-awareness. So learning to think more positively, using positive affirmations. And the key with this is you have to believe in what you're saying. So I'll just share a few that I use. You know, I am doing my best, and that's enough. I forgive myself. I surrender my fear to the guidance of the universe or to your specific religious tour guide. I forget my past and I release my future. Um, so with mindfulness, it's very much about being focused in that present moment, not worrying, eliminating the regrets. They always say regret is the worst emotion that you can feel because there is nothing you can do about the past. You can't control it, you can't change it. You can only try to do better. And that is my New Year's resolution every year. Do better.
Do
That's
better. Regret is such a wasted emotion. Oh my gosh. I agree with you, Krista, on that.
you know, appreciate and enjoy the moments. Don't dwell on negatives or the positives because, you know, some people say, you know, 10 years ago I was so successful and I lost my job and this happened, you know, just focus on the here and now. Um,
Mm.
differentiate between your rational and irrational affairs. So, what can you control and what is out of your power? And focus on how you can do better. Um, always have a contingency plan. If plan A doesn't work out, there's 25 more letters in the alphabet, so one will one will work out.
That's great.
And set small goals to build your confidence and to increase your motivation. Like, it's good to dream big, but realize that, it's not going to happen. What Rome wasn't built in one day. So it's not going to happen all at once. So just, set small goals, celebrate the little steps.
Absolutely. I'm currently on plan O in the alphabet. That's pretty funny. Oh gosh. We're gonna talk a lot more about trauma further in the next couple of weeks too. Krista touched on adverse childhood experiences. Big, really big with emerging adulthood. So now I want to take some time to share this really great TED Talk. This is health psychologist Kelly McGonigal, and health psychology is the study of the psychology of health and public health, and particularly stress as a chronic health issue. So this is about maybe 13 minutes or so. It's a great TED Talk, and I want you all to have an opportunity to watch it, and then we're gonna prompt you with some discussion afterwards.
Oops.
Is it going to open another window?
You may have to, okay, there we go.
Oh, there you go, yeah.
You're gonna have to tell me if you can hear it.
I didn't think of this. Bloop. Please bear with us.
I'll make it bigger once you tell me if you can hear it. Can you hear it?
I have a confession to make. But first, I want you to make a little confession to me. In the past year, I want you to just raise your hand if you've experienced relatively little stress. Anyone? How about a moderate amount of stress? Who's experienced a lot of stress? Yeah, me too. But that is not my confession. My confession is this: I'm a health psychologist, and my mission is to help people be happier and healthier. But I fear that something I've been teaching for the last 10 years is doing more harm than good, and it has to do with stress. For years, I've been telling people stress makes you sick. It increases the risk of everything from the common cold to cardiovascular disease. Basically, I've turned stress into the enemy. But I've changed my mind about stress. And today, I want to change yours. Let me start with the study that made me rethink my whole approach to stress. This study tracked 30,000 adults in the United States for 8 years. And they started by asking people, how much stress have you experienced in the last year? They also asked, do you believe that stress is harmful for your health? And then they used public death records to find out who died. Okay, some bad news first. People who experienced a lot of stress in the previous year had a 43% increased risk of dying. But that was only true for the people who also believed that stress is harmful for your health. People who experienced a lot of stress but did not view stress as harmful were no more likely to die. In fact, they had the lowest risk of dying of anyone in the study, including people who had relatively little stress. Now, the researchers estimated that over the 8 years they were tracking deaths, 182,000 Americans died prematurely, not from stress, but from the belief that stress is bad for you. That is over 20,000 deaths a year. Now, if that estimate is correct, that would make believing stress is bad for you the 15th largest cause of death in the United States last year, killing more people than skin cancer, HIV, AIDS, and homicide. You can see why this study freaked me out. Here I've been spending so much energy telling people stress is bad for your health. So this study got me wondering, can changing how you think about stress make you healthier? And here the science says yes. When you change your mind about stress, you can change your body's response to stress. Now, to explain how this works, I want you all to pretend that you are participants in a study designed to stress you out. It's called the social stress test. You come into the laboratory and you're told you have to give a 5-minute impromptu speech on your personal weaknesses to a panel of expert evaluators sitting right in front of you. And to make sure you feel the pressure, there are bright lights and a camera in your face, kind of like this. And the evaluators have been trained to give you discouraging nonverbal feedback, like this. Now that you're sufficiently demoralized, time for part 2, a math test. And unbeknownst to you, the experimenter has been trained to harass you during it. Now, we're gonna all do this together. It's gonna be fun for me. Okay. I want you all to count backwards from 996 in increments of 7. You're gonna do this out loud as fast as you can, starting with 996. Go. Go faster. Faster, please. You're going too slow. Stop, 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 stop. That guy made a mistake. We're gonna have to start all over again. You're not very good at this, are you? Okay, so you get the idea. Now, if you were actually in this study, you'd probably be a little stressed out. Your heart might be pounding, you might be breathing faster, maybe breaking out into a sweat. And normally we interpret these physical changes as anxiety or signs that we aren't coping very well with the pressure. But what if you viewed them instead as signs that your body was energized, was preparing you to meet this challenge? Now, that is exactly what participants were told in a study conducted at Harvard University. Before they went through the social stress test, they were taught to rethink their stress response as helpful. That pounding heart is preparing you for action. If you're breathing faster, it's no problem. It's getting more oxygen to your brain. And participants who learned to view the stress response as helpful for their performance, well, they were less stressed out, less anxious, more confident. But the most fascinating finding to me was how their physical stress response changed. Now, in a typical stress response, your heart rate goes up and your blood vessels constrict like this. And this is one of the reasons that chronic stress is sometimes associated with cardiovascular disease. It's not really healthy to be in this state all the time. But in the study, when participants viewed their stress response as helpful, their blood vessels stayed relaxed like this. Their heart was still pounding, but this is a much healthier cardiovascular profile. It actually looks a lot like what happens in moments of joy and courage. Over a lifetime of stressful experiences, this one biological change could be the difference between a stress-induced heart attack at age 50 and living well into your 90s. And this is really what the new science of stress reveals, that how you think about stress matters. So my goal as a health psychologist has changed. I no longer want to get rid of your stress. I want to make you better at stress. And we just did a little intervention. If you raised your hand and said you'd had a lot of stress in the last year, we could have saved your life. Because hopefully the next time your heart is pounding from stress, you're going to remember this talk and you're going to think to yourself, this is my body helping me rise to this challenge. And when you view stress in that way, your body believes you and your stress response becomes healthier. Now, I said, I have over a decade of demonizing stress to redeem myself from. So we are going to do one more intervention. I want to tell you about one of the most underappreciated aspects of the stress response. And the idea is this: stress makes you social. To understand the side of stress, we need to talk about a hormone, oxytocin. And I know oxytocin has already gotten as much hype as a hormone can get. It even has its own cute nickname, the cuddle hormone, because it's released when you hug someone. But this is a very small part of what oxytocin is involved in. Oxytocin is a neurohormone. It fine-tunes your brain's social instincts. It primes you to do things that strengthen close relationships. Oxytocin makes you crave physical contact with your friends and family. It enhances your empathy. It even makes you more willing to help and support the people you care about. Some people have even suggested we should snort oxytocin to become more compassionate and caring. But here's what most people don't understand about oxytocin. It's a stress hormone. Your pituitary gland pumps this stuff out as part of the stress response. It's as much a part of your stress response as the adrenaline that makes your heart pound. And when oxytocin is released in the stress response, it is motivating you to seek support. Your biological stress response is nudging you to tell someone how you feel instead of bottling it up. Your stress response wants to make sure you notice when someone else in your life is struggling so that you can support each other. When life is difficult, your stress response wants you to be surrounded by people who care about you. Okay, so how is knowing this side of stress going to make you healthier? Well, oxytocin doesn't only act on your brain, it also acts on your body. And one of its main roles in your body is to protect your cardiovascular system from the effects of stress. It's a natural anti-inflammatory. It also helps your blood vessels stay relaxed during stress. But my favorite effect on the body is actually on the heart. Your heart has receptors for this hormone. And oxytocin helps heart cells regenerate and heal from any stress-induced damage. This stress hormone strengthens your heart. And the cool thing is that all of these physical benefits of oxytocin are enhanced by social contact and social support. So when you reach out to others under stress, either to seek support or to help someone else, you release more of this hormone, your stress response becomes healthier, and you actually recover faster from stress. I find this amazing that your stress response has a built-in mechanism for stress resilience. And that mechanism is human connection. I want to finish by telling you about one more study. And listen up, because this study could also save a life. This study tracked about 1,000 adults in the United States, and they ranged in age from 34 to 93. And they started the study by asking, how much stress have you experienced in the last year? They also asked, how much time have you spent helping out friends, neighbors, people in your community? And then they used public records for the next 5 years to find out who died. Okay, so the bad news first. For every major stressful life experience, like financial difficulties or a family crisis, that increased the risk of dying by 30%. But, and I hope you are expecting a but by now, but that wasn't true for everyone. People who spent time caring for others showed absolutely no stress-related increase in dying, 0. Caring created resilience. And so we see once again that the harmful effects of stress on your health are not inevitable. How you think and how you act can transform your experience of stress. When you choose to view your stress response as helpful, you create the biology of courage. And when you choose to connect with others under stress, you can create resilience. Now, I wouldn't necessarily ask for more stressful experiences in my life, but this science has given me a whole new appreciation for stress. Stress gives us access to our hearts. The compassionate heart that finds joy and meaning in connecting with others. And yes, your pounding physical heart working so hard to give you strength and energy. And when you choose to view stress in this way, you're not just getting better at stress, you're actually making a pretty profound statement. You're saying that you can trust yourself to handle life's challenges. And you're remembering that you don't have to face them alone. Thank you.
Yes. Helpful stress. Talked about that in the first week, if you recall. What is useful stress? And I love the concept of the biology of courage. I love that. I think that is so profound. And when you think about it, it just kind of blows you away a little bit, because bravery is a choice, taking risks, right? And then what do we go back to? And she talked about it in her talk, is connectedness, right? The more we connect with people, engage in our social supports, it replicates a different stress response. And it was interesting, the diagram with the heart, when you're in chronic stress, how it strains the heart. But when you have helpful stress or you can connect with others, it's almost a parallel response. It's so interesting. So I want to, for a little bit of brief discussion here, and please utilize the chat. Just some questions. When you were watching it, what are some things that came up for you? Do you think that stress can be helpful? Like, what do you think about that?